One way that we can change our behavior as educators is by considering how the concepts of deprivation and satiation can impact our students' behaviors. We'll start by discussing the technical definitions of deprivation and satiation. Think of deprivation as going without something reinforcing to you for an amount of time that, consequently, temporarily increases the value of something as a reinforcer. This concept is a little bit confusing, so a story might help. Jason's wife, Julie, was pregnant with their first child. Jason was really excited because he had heard from his friends that Julie was going to have these really fun food cravings, and Jason was really excited to eat some junk food. But early on in her pregnancy, all Julie wanted was healthy foods, a lot of salads, lean meats, and vegetables. At that point, the least Jason could do was support her with eating meals based on her culinary preferences, and they didn't eat much junk food. Buffalo wings are one of Jason's favorite foods. He went 6 or 7 months without buffalo wings, which for Jason is a very long time. At that point in time, he was temporarily deprived of buffalo wings. What that means is since Jason hadn't had them in a while, the thought of eating buffalo wings became even more reinforcing at that specific moment in time. When we're temporarily deprived of something, and we haven't had it for a while, that becomes even more valuable as a reinforcer. For example, let's say you go on a long hike and you haven't had water for several hours. During this long hike, accessing a bottle of water is likely to be incredibly reinforcing. You might pay $1,000 for a bottle of water if you're thirsty enough, when you wouldn't even pay $1 for a bottle of water. Let's go back to our buffalo wing example. At that moment in time, Jason was temporarily deprived of buffalo wings. Finally, Julie wanted some spicy food and said, "Let's get buffalo wings." And Jason said, "Awesome! That sounds great. I'm definitely on board." That first bite of buffalo wing tasted better than any buffalo wing Jason had ever had before. Again, because he was temporarily deprived, it became even more valuable as a reinforcer at that specific moment in time. Let's talk about the opposite of deprivation, which is satiation. Satiation is accessing a substantial amount of a reinforcer, and as a result, temporarily decreasing the value of a certain reinforcer. Julie wanted buffalo wings that night. It was awesome. Best buffalo wings ever. Night number 2, she wanted buffalo wings again. Really had a craving for spicy foods, and buffalo wings are one of her favorite foods as well. They got buffalo wings a second night, and then she wanted them again a third night. Now Jason was trying to be supportive, but by the third night this was challenging, even though buffalo wings are one of his favorite foods. Remember the old saying, too much of anything, even if it's a good thing, tends to be a bad thing? At that moment in time, even though buffalo wings are one of Jason's favorite foods, he had become satiated. Buffalo wings were temporarily less valuable because Jason had way too many of them. Let's talk about how the concepts of deprivation and satiation apply to our work with students. Jimmy is a student who engages in a lot of physically aggressive behaviors to the point that his peers and educators are injured. An iPad had been the only thing Jimmy was willing to work for early in the school year. A few months into the school year, even the iPad wasn't functioning as a reinforcer, and Jimmy's rate of task completion was quite low. Now take a moment and think about whether deprivation or satiation could be involved here. Well, if you're thinking, even though Jimmy really likes the iPad, I'm sure at some point Jimmy's going to get tired of the iPad, you're right. Jimmy became satiated with the iPad. At some point, no matter how much a student enjoys accessing a particular item or activity, they are likely to become satiated. We don't want our students to satiate on reinforcers because that means those reinforcers lose their value and they no longer really function as reinforcers. To safeguard against satiation, we want to use a variety of reinforcers with our students. That way, we're kind of maintaining a healthy state of deprivation with regards to each reinforcer we use. In other words, every reinforcer we're using, it's still new, it's still novel for our students, and there's an incentive to work towards accessing that reinforcer. Going back to Jimmy, math was his least preferred activity of the entire school day, specifically independent seat work during math class. Consequently, the iPad could no longer be used to reinforce task completion during each part of the day. The iPad was reserved for completing independent seat work in math, and by limiting access to the iPad was even more reinforcing for Jimmy. For small, relatively easy tasks for Jimmy to complete, or tasks that Jimmy tended to prefer, very minor reinforcers were offered, maybe just verbal praise, different things like that. But for those difficult, less preferred, aversive tasks, The iPad is reserved for those. By maintaining a healthy state of deprivation with regards to that reinforcer, we can incentivize task completion during independent math seat work where it might not have worked previously. Here's another anecdote from a math classroom. During instructional times early in the school year, several students would continue talking, as well as asking to leave their seats to sharpen pencils, get a drink of water, or visit the restroom. As you might imagine, this was extremely disruptive to the class. But think about how much time our students spend in their seats, maybe listening as opposed to actively conversing with one another or actively participating in class. This could be a case of movement and social interaction deprivation. In other words, students don't have a whole lot of time during the day out of their seats to interact with one another, and consequently being temporarily deprived of movement and social interaction renders behaviors that result in opportunities for movement and social interaction with peers even more valuable. Students in the class needed opportunities to both move around and interact with one another during their time in the classroom. To meet the students' needs, we might implement center activities and brain breaks, increased opportunities for active participation in class, and embedded cooperative learning during instructional times just to get students up and moving around the classroom and interacting with one another. This strategy might decrease some of those problem behaviors maintained by movement and social interaction deprivation. In addition to the potential to decreasing problem behaviors maintained by movement and social interaction deprivation, there are also great ways to foster student engagement and achievement at the same time.